Vlog number 1, Unit 1, Chapters 1 through 8, by Sonia Mendonça. Chapter 1. Beginning about 2 million years ago, the Great Ice Age had left parts of Europe, Asia, and the Americas covered with thick ice sheets. About 10,000 years ago, the Great Ice Age had shaped the geological history of North America, and once the sea levels had dropped, it exposed the Bering Land Bridge connecting Eurasia with North America. These natives who were now living here were the Incas in Peru, Mayans in Central America, and Aztecs in Mexico. They had established thriving civilizations and advanced agriculture based on mostly corn, but also beans and squash, known as the Three Sisters. The Europeans were unaware of the existence of the Americas until they had come across the New World. In the 15th century, the New World was now in the hands of the Europeans. Gold and slaves was the new best thing, and from this came the sugar plantations that Portugal and later on Spain had established. In the year 1492, Christopher Columbus had set on a search for India, but instead had found the New World. Between the New World and the Europeans, they had exchanged things amongst each other. The New World had introduced things such as gold, silver, corn, potatoes, tobacco, beans, vanilla, and chocolate, while the Europeans introduced wheat, sugar cane, rice, coffee, horses, and many diseases that wiped out many Americans. Chapter 2. England was also interested in expanding its colony, and thanks to Queen Elizabeth, they were able to do so. On May 24, 1607, the Virginia Company had established Jamestown. The people of Jamestown died by the dozens because they were more focused on finding non-existent gold than providing for themselves. Maryland was the second plantation colony, but the fourth English colony to be founded in 1634 by Lord Baltimore. Oliver Cromwell had ruled over England for nearly a decade after beheading King Charles I in 1649, but in 1660 Charles II restored his throne. During the Restoration period, Carolina had formed in 1607. Due to frictions with governors, Carolina separated in 1712 to what is now known as North and South Carolina. In 1733, Georgia was founded and proved to be the last of the 13 colonies. Chapter 3. A group of separatists landed at Plymouth Bay in 1620 and had all signed the Mayflower Compact, which ensured genuine self-government. In 1630, a group of non-separatist Puritans feared for the faith and for England's future and established the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The colony's first governor was John Winthrop. He declared that the colony was a city upon a hill, and the Puritans believed they had to build a holy society. In 1643, 4 colonies band together to form the New England Confederation, which consisted of 2 Massachusetts colonies and 2 Connecticut colonies. Chapter 4. For the earliest Chesapeake settlers, your lifeline was short due to diseases. Nevertheless, during the 18th century, Virginia and Maryland populated with thousands of people. With its tobacco civilizations meant indentured servants. In 1676, these indentured servants revolted during Bacon's Rebellion, and they turned to Africa for slaves. Unlike the Chesapeake immigrants, settlers from New England reached a longer lifespan when migrating with family. New Englanders developed a tightly knit society while growing in a more orderly fashion. Yet, because of their religion, these Puritans became paranoid, which led to the witch hunt and the Salem witch trials. Chapter 5. In the 1700s, population was beginning to increase, and by 1775, Virginia was the most populous colony, followed by Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Maryland. Colonial America was populated with not only English settlers, but Germans, Scotch-Irish, and African-American settlers as well. The Great Awakening set for a religious revival in the 1730s and 40s that had swept throughout the colonies. Pastor Jonathan Edwards initiated this awakening in the Northampton, Massachusetts. Puritan New England were more attracted to education, particularly for leadership for males. The printing press was generally used, which was the reason John Peter Zenger was accused in 1734 through 1735, although with his defendant, Andrew Hamilton, who stated, "The very liberty of both exposing and opposing a arbitrary power was at stake." The judges decided Zenger was not guilty. The Zenger decision was a banner achievement for freedom of press and for health and democracy. Chapter 6. In 1598, a new era issued by France called the Edict of Nantes granted limited tolerance and religious freedom to French Protestants. King Louis XIV had led France to be the most feared nation in Europe. In 1608, French established a vast empire at Quebec. The leading figure at this time was Samuel de Champlain, who became known as the Father of France. Louis XIV helped to establish New France in Canada. The King William's War in 1689 through 1697 and Queen Anne's War were mostly battles between the British, French, and the French ally Spain. Once the British had won in 1713, a peace treaty was signed at Utrecht. George Washington had provoked the British in 1754, causing the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 had ended this war and had eliminated French power. Chapter 7. American colonists were growing more independent and developing their own brand of politics. They had been embracing republicanism, which is a society where citizens elect representatives to govern for them, and also radical Whigs that fundamentally shaped American political thought derived from British political commentators. First passed in 1650, the navigation laws to regulate the mercantilism system. This law was despised by the Americans and until 1763 imposed no intolerance burden, for it was only loosely enforced, called salutary neglect. The first tax on Americans was the Sugar Act in 1764, but after the Americans had protested, things had eventually calmed. After the Quartering Act in 1765, the Stamp Act was passed, causing rage and the notion of no taxation without representation. There was only so much the colonists could handle until March 5, 1770, when the Boston Massacre occurred, when colonists had provoked the British redcoats. In a similar matter, the Boston Tea Party, which took place on December 16, 1773, when the so-called ringleader Samuel Adams and his protesters, dressed as Indians, to dump 342 chests of tea into the harbor to protest the taxes on tea. Chapter 8. The Second Continental Congress met on May 10, 1775, and had appointed George Washington to lead the Continental Army because of his outstanding powers of leadership and immense strength of character. The events of early 1776 were making Americans reconsider their loyalty to the king until Thomas Paine's pamphlet called Common Sense urged American independence. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, which was approved by Congress on July 4, 1776. Americans were not united in the War of Independence. Loyalists, also called Tories, were loyal to their king and supported the British troops, while the Patriots, called Whigs, supported the war for independence. About 50,000 Loyalists served the British in the war as soldiers, and a huge British fleet arrived at New York. The Battle of Saratoga was perhaps the most critical battle of the war, when Burgoyne's troops arrived and had no choice but to surrender on October 17, 1777, at the Battle of Yorktown. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 had ended the American Revolution and had declared American independence.